Since I moved my doll making studio onto a tiny narrowboat in Wales 6 years ago, I've tended to avoid making larger sized dolls, partly because of a lack of storage space and partly because it's been so difficult since 2020 to find the right materials. Finding a bag of vintage metal beads on eBay recently gave me the push I needed to create a whole new doll design. But new designs always come with a few new challenges. The last 5 years have made it pretty hard for artists working in physical media to stay afloat. With small businesses being squeezed from all directions, I responded by making everything tiny. Tiny art was easier to find materials for, easier to store, and easier to sell. But in 2026, things are changing again, and it's time for a slightly larger challenge. So when I found these gorgeous heavy bronze finish beads on eBay, I knew I had to grab them. They were far too big to work with my current doll templates, so I decided to go back to the drawing board and design something completely new. There's always an element of risk making something larger at a higher price point, but with international sales starting to come in again, it was now or never. If you just found me, by the way, welcome. My name's Jo. I'm a full-time artist based in cold and rainy Wales. I do apologise if you can hear creaking noises in the background. It is a little bit windy today and the boat's moving about a bit. Channel members on the Orb Weaver tier will have already seen the template for this one. I didn't want to just scale up one of my existing templates, so I've made something that's the same style, the same basic shape, but it is a little bit different, so it's something completely new. Because I've redesigned it all, it may need some adjustment. I'm not quite sure how the pieces are going to fit together, and I'm not the best at maths, so I don't know if I've made the legs wide enough to fit the beads at the knee, but I can always adjust it a little bit and make another template if any of the bits don't fit. I'm not 100% sure whether I've made the torso big enough. It kind of looks okay, I think. My main concern is whether the neck is going to be wide enough and solid enough to support the weight of the head. I've stuffed one of the legs just to see how it works with those beads, and I think it is a little bit too narrow at the knee. It could also do with being a little bit longer, I think, so I'm going to put this template to one side. I may use that piece for another doll, but for this one I want to make the legs a little bit wider and a bit longer. So I've remade the legs. I've made them 2mm wider and a bit longer as well, and those are a much better fit with those beads. I'm just hoping that they're not going to be too wide to sit well on the hips against the torso. Because of the stretch of the fabric, pieces always look a little bit different once you stuff them from how they look when they're flat, so the only way to really test it is to just make a doll with it. These beads are absolutely gorgeous. I don't think these are solid bronze. I did file one down a little bit and there's another metal underneath, but they are so solid and heavy, and the edges are smooth as well, which is always an advantage because the thread just glides through them without snagging at all. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and let me know. You can also subscribe if you like so you don't miss the next one. So the neck is a button joint, and this is where I get to find out if I've made the neck thick enough. The button joint is held between one button on the top of the head and another one on the back. I use some top stitch thread to string between the two, and then the tension of that holds the head in place, so it can kind of tilt from one side to the other, but it stays stable without flopping to one side. The tension needs to be tight enough to hold the head steady. but if I put too much tension on it, then the neck can crumple. There, that seems to be quite steady. I think that's going to hold it fine. I'm attaching the legs to the body with a hinge joint. Again, I'm just using some top stitch thread for this. I'm hoping I've made the hips wide enough so the legs will sit in a natural position. Again, I need to make sure I get the tension right so she can sit and stand without the legs being too loose and without it restricting movement. I'm not happy with the position of those. So I'm just going to take them off and start again. I also remembered that I was going to paint some shoes on these before I attach them to the body. It's a lot easier to paint shoes when the legs are separate, so I'm going to do that first. I'm painting the shoes with some acrylic paint with a bit of fabric medium mixed in. I could have given her some long boots, but I decided this one needed some little Mary Jane shoes. I start with a grey coat, so there's a lot of titanium white in the first coat, so that will cover the stripes on the legs, and then I'll go over it with a darker shade. This paint is a kind of a satin finish, and I could leave it like that, but I want these to be glossy, so I'm going to go over it with a gloss polyurethane varnish. I'm going to make sure that varnish is cured properly before I start attaching the legs to the body, so while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to start the shading on the face. I've dug out some larger sized metal buttons for the eyes, so I'm going to shade a nice large dark area around where they're going to be. I'm using a dark brown and black, blending the colour in between coats with a blending pencil. I'm going to give that a couple of coats of fixative spray, then it might need a little more adjustment. So while the fixative dries, I'm going to go back to the legs and attach those onto the body. I'm sewing them a little bit wider apart than I did the first time, and I'm keeping the threads a little bit looser so there's a bit more flexibility. I double check it before I fasten the thread off just to make sure she can sit and stand comfortably without the movement being restricted. I've made her some little bloomers from some cotton broderie anglaise trim. I've left the edge of that raw around the top because I'm going to sew the bodice over the top of that and I want it to sit nice and flat. These bronze finish buttons are some that I found pre-2020 and they've been sitting in a drawer for a long time just waiting for the right doll to use them on, and they are absolutely stunning. I think they're perfect for this one. I'm adding some line work to the face with a fine liner pen, and then I shade under the mouth with some coloured pencil and blend it again with a burnishing pencil. The pencils I use are Derwent Chromaflow. I will put some links to some of the materials I use down in the description. I'm using some burgundy coloured cotton velvet for the dress. Now the question is, do I sew the lace on at the bottom, over or under the skirt? If I sew it over the top, it might look a little bit messy where it's stitched. I think I'm going to sew it underneath, so it's just peeking out. I found a little scrap of lace trim with some ribbon threaded through it for the bodice. That pink ribbon just needs to go though. I'm going to replace it with something else. I've got some very thin velvet ribbon which could look nice. The question is how to thread it through. First I try sewing it onto the existing ribbon and then pulling it through, but that's just not going to work at all. So I try threading it onto a bodkin and pushing that through. The bodkin is just too wide and that's not going to go either. I try a darning needle, but still no luck. I think this ribbon is just not going to work, so I find another one, which is a satin ribbon. It's a little bit thinner than the velvet ribbon, and this one's going through okay on the darning needle, so I think I'm going to go with this one. I actually really like the contrast of the satin texture against the velvet. I hand stitch that in place so I can get it exactly where I want it and then close up the back of the bodice. I'm using extra strong thread for this, which is a little bit thinner than the top stitch thread, so it doesn't show the stitches up too much. Now the challenge with the skirt is placing it so it hangs naturally and not looking too bulky. I take my time gathering it and pinning it in place, adjusting it around the top until I'm happy with how it's sitting. Then I'll hand stitch it onto the doll, so I know it's going to stay in place. I thought about adding some sleeves to the dress, but I don't want to hide those lovely bronze coloured beads. So I decided to give her some tattoos instead. Again, I'm just using a fine liner pen for this and adding some botanical leafy designs. For the hair, I've picked out some viscose roving in a lovely shiny jet black. I'm needle felting that in place with the Clover pen style felting tool. Viscose roving generally felts in pretty easily. There is a little bit of waste that gets brushed out when I'm felting, but I save all that and use it for other needle felting projects. I recently made a needle felted spider that turned out to be quite popular, and that one's already found a home, so I might make some more of those with this. I keep adding viscose fibre layer by layer until I cover the whole scalp area. I'm really careful around the top of the head. I don't want to break a needle on that button, so I'm careful to felt around it and along the seams. I've named this one Sabrina Ravenheart. Sabrina found a home very quickly, which I was absolutely delighted about. This has given me my confidence back in selling larger work, so I want to make some more dolls this size soon. Do let me know what kind of dolls you'd like to see next. If you've enjoyed watching this one, I'm going to leave another video here that I think you're going to enjoy where I'm making a crow doll. So go and watch that one now, and I'll see you next time. Bye!